Hey, it's Frank here with Frank's DIY and Homeownership Help, and today we are going to make this right here. We'll call it the coronavirus version of the show. I went to the grocery store the other day, and guess what? There was no bread and no eggs. And I find it a lot more difficult to lay an egg. So although a lot of my videos could be considered egg laying. But anyway, so I'm going to show you how to make bread. I've been doing this recipe for a couple of years, and it's dirt simple, easy to make, really tasty, and forget about the department stores. You don't need to. You can make your bread right here at home. Okay, first thing to do is to wash your surfaces. So I'm going to do all the kneading right here because I'm very needy. And I'm going to use this mixer with this hook. This hook is specially made for dough, I guess, and breads and that kind of thing. And wash your hands really well as well. Have really clean surfaces. Coronavirus or not, you always want to have really clean surfaces, especially when you're baking. Okay, so here's what you need to make this bread. It's pretty simple. So you need some all-purpose flour. You can get specific flour for bread, but you don't need to. I'm going to use honey. This is my own honey, made from my own bees, from 4D Honeybee, if you want to check out that channel. You just write 4, the letter D, and honeybee all together in one word, and see how I make this honey, or bees make it, I just take it. Some salt, not too much salt. Some yeast. You can use the fast rising stuff. I use this general sort of active dry yeast, works fine. And some oil. It could be canola oil, vegetable oil, it could be olive oil. It just kind of gives it a thicker density, which I really like. You can also use sugar instead of honey. I try not to use any sugar at all just because I have honey. Basically you use 4:1 honey to sugar if you have it. If you don't, again, you'll see the ingredients down below here. But if you can use honey, and you've had lots of it like I do, use it because it's much more natural. Okay, so I always start off with the yeast, 1 tablespoon of yeast. Actually, I start off with the hot water. There's 3 cups of hot water in here. And some people get uppity about the actual temperature of the water. I don't. I find that hot tap water from your tap works just fine. I have once tried to boil it, and the bread didn't work out so well. So the temperature is important, but the temperature that the water comes out at from your hot water tank, I find works just fine. So put the yeast in first, then I'll put the sugar/honey in next, because again, you want the sugar to start reacting with the yeast as soon as possible to activate it, right? So I'm going to do about roughly 4 tablespoons of honey in here. And this is last year's fall honey. And the reason why it's solidified is that I let the honey get too cold, let it freeze. Then I warmed it up to process it and to get it out, and it ended up solidifying, which is still perfectly fine. Just means you gotta melt it or heat it up gradually. And I don't know, I lost track. What was I at? 3 or 4? I don't know. And baking can be an exact science, but it doesn't have to be, I think. My mother is a pretty decent baker. She's never used a measuring utensil in her life, but she comes up with some pretty good stuff anyway. So there, we'll get the honey melting in there with the yeast. Start creating your little monster, and then we'll keep adding the ingredients, the rest of the ingredients. Okay, so a tablespoon of salt. It's looking pretty good. And then a couple tablespoons of oil. And again, what oil you use here doesn't really matter too much. I haven't used olive oil yet, but I usually use canola oil. Don't have any today, so I'm just going to use this vegetable oil. It should turn out the same. Again, it's just a question of affecting the texture of the bread. Less oil you use, probably the fluffier you'll get it. I like mine to be a little more dense. You know, just like me. Okay, so for the initial monster here, we're going to start off with 3 cups of flour. And these 3 cups we're going to add right into this. Actually, I'm just going to make sure that the honey is all dissolved. Okay, so just going to make sure the honey is all dissolved and that everything's starting to mix up and creating the sludge that I call the monster. This is really what makes the bread, gives the bread its flavor, gives it its texture, and determines whether or not it's going to rise. If you screw anything up, you're screwing it up at this point. So just take your time. You don't want to let it cool too much, but you don't have to be in a massive hurry either. Just make sure it's got a nice mix to it, and it's all in one big solution, and it is. Just kind of feel around, make sure all the honey is dissolved. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add 3 cups of flour immediately to this part, just so that you have your start. And then we'll start mixing it. When we start mixing it, we'll only add about 1.5 cups of flour at a time, and just allow it to continue to mix. And you just don't want to overdo it. You don't want to rush. You'll end up, this recipe, you'll end up using about 7 to 8 cups of flour. And you just add them gradually. This part is probably the longest and the most tedious part, where you're actually attending to the process. And you just take your time at it. So here goes 3 cups of flour into this base mixture. So there's your base all set. Now we'll get this dough hook in there. I don't know if I called it that before, but that's what it is. And we'll get her going. Basically what you're trying to do now with the mixing is you're trying to get all the lumps out, especially out of this first little monster that you got going. The thing about doing bread is you really can't overbeat it. Generally, I think the more beating it takes, the better it gets. So you can feel free to speed up the mixer if you do have a mixer. If you don't have a mixer, you don't have to have one. You can just do this by hand with your wooden spoon in the mixing bowl. It'll work just fine. That's how my parents do it. So we're going to continue to mix this up until all of those hard bits are gone. And then once it starts to smooth out, we'll just start adding 1/2 cup at a time. Okay, so you can see now that it's smoothed out quite a bit. There's no big lumps in it. And there's also no flour that's not mixed in. So now all I'm going to do is grab this full cup. I'm just going to show you something here too. I'm going to turn the camera for a sec. What I do is I always put the flour bag right at the surface where I'm going to actually do the kneading, because the flour is always going to pop out and spill out, and it falls on the surface that you're going to end up having to cover in flour anyway. So that's a little bit of a tip, just so that you make less of a mess and you kind of work in a more organized fashion. So this is what I do. I just try and put in about not much more than 1/2 cup at a time, just to allow it to mix in more easily. If you dump in a whole cup right now, it just won't mix as well. Just do about 1/2 cup, 1/2 cup at a time. You can keep track or not. If you keep track, you're going to find that around 7 cups, and not 7 new cups, so 7 total cups. Remember, there's already 3 cups in here, so this is the 4th cup. Around 7 cups is when the dough really starts taking proper shape. So we're on about cup number 5 here, and you can see how it's still sticking to the sides. You see the dough inside, how it's still sticking to the sides. And here you can see what happens too when you pour in too much. When you pay more attention to your video than your actual baking. If you pour too much, and now because the thing's getting full, if you pour too much flour in at once, it spits it all out. So be careful of that. Again, if you're just working on the surface that you're going to end up kneading the dough on anyway, it's not too big a deal because you just use that flour to do your kneading. And you can see how, even as we've just put in that, when you get to your last, couple of additions of flour, the dough will start sticking to the hook and peeling off of the side of the bowl. You see how it's starting to come off the side of the bowl? It's not quite ready yet. I'm just going to slow it down a bit. It's not quite ready yet, but when it starts peeling, maybe another cup or 2, when it starts peeling off the side of the bowl, that's when you'll know it's ready. Okay, I lost track of how many cups I was on, because it doesn't really matter. Now I just do it kind of by texture, but generally once you get to that 7th cup, you're starting to be complete, and you can see how it's all kind of starting to peel off the side of the tin there, of the bowl, and if you just keep adding a little more, it'll be perfect. Now if you add too much flour, it'll start flaking off. So it'll start falling off in flakes, as opposed to, as you see, it still kind of looks like a spider web type of stickiness that it's still sticking to the side of the bowl. Well, then with a little more flour, it'll start peeling all the dough right off of the sides, and it'll be all one big mass for you. Okay, so now I want you to see a couple of things here. So it has got this machine absolutely maxed. You see how it's starting to struggle just to turn? It just happens that this machine maxes out pretty much at 7 cups. And you can see how it's all peeled off the sides now. It's all one sort of big mass. So this one is ready for you to take out. Okay, when you go to remove the dough from the mixer, this is something that's really important to do. Get a lot of flour on your hands, because it's still going to be pretty sticky, and you don't want it sticking to you. It's going to stick to everything at this point. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so lift that up. We'll see if I can remove this thing. Yep, that came out pretty nice. And now I'm just going to work it off of the hook into one big mass, and then we're going to do some kneading. There you go. Ready to rock and roll. Okay, so here's our mass. Now, this is kind of a tricky part to show on a video or explain to somebody, and it's, what do you do with it now, right? Well, now you want to knead it. You want to knead it because you want the last little bit of texture and consistency you want to do by hand. So right now it's kind of sticky to the touch. And so you flour up, make sure you flour up your surface, flour up your hands, and you just start kneading it, right? And there's a couple of techniques to knead it. I took a while to figure this out, but basically what you want to do is reach at the sides and pull in and push in the middle, right? And do that. You can do it with 2 hands, you can do it with 1 hand. I'm turning it with one, kind of kneading with both. But what this does is it gives you one completely smooth surface with no creases, right? With no lines or folds. You see all those folds? You don't want to end up having folds on the top of your loaf of bread, just because it looks bad, right? So if you use this process of pulling it into the middle, pushing down, you end up with one side, the side that's down against the bottom, nice and smooth and with no folds. Watch. See that? That's what you end up wanting to be your face up. We're still quite a ways before we're doing the final product, but we're getting close. Now, so the texture you're looking for here is kind of an elasticy, non-sticky texture. And it's pretty much there right now. I can tell this is going to be a good round of bread just because it feels good. See how it's kind of stretching out and coming back in? That's what I mean by elasticy, right? A little more flour. It's certainly not sticking to my fingers anymore. It's not sticking to the surface, even though all the flour has been absorbed. So this one is pretty much ready for the next step. Okay, for this next step, I kind of do things a little differently than most probably. What you're supposed to do is, now we've got our beautiful dough in a beautiful bowl, ready to proof. And you're supposed to just drape a cloth over it. But what I found is this thing's going to expand. Like, you see the size now? Remember that size, because when it's done, it's going to be a monster. It's going to be huge, right? And if you put a cloth on top of it, it ends up rising and getting stuck to the cloth and making a unholy mess. So I'm going to use plastic. The problem is, and the reason why you're supposed to use a cloth as opposed to plastic, is that you're supposed to let it breathe. It needs to breathe. It needs air. So what I do is I take this plastic, pour a little bit of oil in there, as you saw me just make a mess and do. I'll run some oil over the plastic because I fully expect that this will expand to a point where it'll touch the plastic, and if you just grease it up with a bit of oil, it's not going to stick. And you're going to be really happy you did so afterwards. Now, you got this all lubed up. You bring your bowl over, you cover it up, and now this thing has to breathe, right? So you cover it up, you get it sealed nice and airtight so that it can't breathe, and then you just poke holes in it. Grab a little knife, and I just poke holes all around it so that it can breathe, right? And again, this is my method. Grandma didn't teach me to do this. Your grandma may be upset at this technique, but this works for me. Gets air in and does not cause a mess. All right, so now we're going to come over here. And this oven, I'm very fortunate that this oven actually has a proofing setting here. See this right here? Boom. Hit proof. And if you don't have a proofing setting, that's fine. You don't need it. You just need the bread in a warm, preferably dark place. If it's winter and you got, you know, your furnace going, you can put it over a heating register. You can put it in the sun. You can put it on top of a fridge or some place where it's going to be warm. And now it has to proof for an hour and a half. Okay, so here's the big reveal. It's been an hour and a half. It's been proofing for an hour and a half there, I think. I can't remember. And let's see if it has risen. Oh, look at that monster. Wow. Hopefully I can figure out how to do a before and after split image of it and show you how much it's. Look at that. And now if the treating of the plastic with oil worked, this shouldn't stick at all. It should just come off really nicely. Oh yeah, look at that. That's fantastic. That's going to work for me every time. So now I'm going to put it back on my working surface here, and I'm going to knead it for a little bit. And again, I'm always going to keep this surface flat so that there's no creases in it. I'll do all the folds on the other side just like I did before so that the top of the bread will look really nice. I'm going to start kneading it, then I'm going to slice it in half because I'm going to do 2 loaves, and then we'll need to proof again in the loaf pans, and then we're ready to bake. Okay, so you know what's something I think I forgot to do? I forgot to oil this pan. Yeah, you're supposed to oil this pan just like I oiled the plastic so that it won't stick. So this might be a bit of a sticky situation. Let's see. That's not too bad. If you oil the pan, it just comes off a lot easier and doesn't end up sticking. So this is pretty manageable. We can deal with that. So again, we've got the surface all floured up. Now we're going to get some flour on our hands. And again, using the same technique here, we're just going to knead everything in towards the middle. Just keep kneading it all. And what you're doing, you can actually hear air forcing its way out of the dough now. I'm just going to knead it as one big entity for a bit, and then I'm going to cut it in half and do each separate piece for a little bit as well. And again, just folding everything into the middle. You see all the folds and creases will end up here. It's nice and elastic. You see how it's bouncing back? And then the other side, the side that's on the bottom, that'll be the top of the bread right there. Very satisfying. Slapping your bread. Okay, so I'm just going to cut it in half here. And I mean, you can do whatever you want with this bread. You can make it into dinner rolls and do a bunch of small slices, or you can make one huge loaf, or you can make a round loaf, whatever you want. I'm going to do 2 loaves because I have 2 pans, and that way we can maybe save one for later, tuck into one right away. Okay, so now go back to just working this one. And I think this is called pounding down the dough, but I'm not sure. And again, all you're doing is working that air out of it so that it will rise due to the reaction of the yeast and sugars, as opposed to just being full of air, like some of us are. Okay, so these are the 2 pans I'm going to use, and it's going to be interesting because this pan is fairly new. It's a coated Teflon pan, so it'll never stick to this. It works really well. And just in case, what I do is I line the pan with butter. And butter is supposed to help it not stick, but it also crisps up the bread that's in contact with the pan and really gives it a nice flavor. This pan is not a non-stick pan, but it gives me a nice long loaf, which I like. Normally I put a piece of parchment paper in this, but we don't have parchment paper, so I'm concerned it's going to stick to this. So I am going to load, and I mean load this up with first oil. I'm going to line it with oil and then butter as well. And hopefully that'll prevent this from sticking. Alright, so all I do is just grab butter, doesn't matter whether it's room temperature or not, and just spread it all around. Again, this pan doesn't really need the butter. For this pan, I just like the butter on it. Soaked cloth that I use to soak the plastic that I line the bowl with for the proofing. So see, I'm just going to line this. You can see the shiny sheen of the oil, right? But then I'm going to top it off with a whole whack of butter too, and hopefully this won't stick. Because I will tell you, if you go to all this trouble, the whole process of baking bread is about 3 hours. And when you go to that whole trouble and then you pull out your bread and it sticks, it is very frustrating. So do everything you can, do everything in your power to prevent bread from sticking in your pans. And even though I'm putting a piece of parchment paper on, it's not going to cover the entire bottom, I'm still going to butter at the bottom as well. Alright, now I'll put this in here. And then what we'll do is I'm just going to rub down the, I'm going to knead the bread a little more just to shape it into the shape of the pans. Put it in, one more proofing, and then we're baking. Okay, so this is the loaf I will do in that long pan. So I'm just going to start stretching it out with the kneading to make it roughly the shape of the pan. Just long and narrow. And you can see we're going to end up with one crease here on the underside. And hopefully no creases on that side. This is a good way to get a little arm workout, a little triceps workout. So no one can say I haven't worked out today. And you can still hear that you're pushing out a lot of air when you're doing this last bit of kneading. So let's see how this fits in the pan. You don't have to worry if it, occupies the whole amount of the pan. It's going to expand on its own quite a bit. I'll show you what I do. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Wow. See that? So we will proof this for another half hour, and then we'll put a slice through the top of the bread to allow it to expand so that it doesn't explode off the top. And then we're baking for about 35 minutes. Okay, so what's happened here is that we've used the oven to bake some nachos. So the oven's too hot for proofing. So in the back here we've got the vents of the oven, which the hot air comes out of. That's more than enough to proof this bread. So I'll let it sit there. I'll do 10 minutes on this side, then I'll turn it around for 10 minutes, and you got another 20-minute proof. You'll see the bread already starts to rise, even just in the proofing process. Then we're going to slice it down the middle. Then into the oven it goes at 375 for about 35 minutes. I'll check it at about the 20-25 minute mark. How effective just a little bit of warmth is in the proofing. See, the heat is coming from this side, from those vents there. And so you can see the bread is actually rising more from that side than this side. So 10 minutes in, I'm just going to flip around. The bread is rising quite nicely. This is going to be amazing. I'll just turn this around. Give it another 10 minutes. You can see how this is filling out as well. 10 minutes more, and then it all goes in the oven for about, like I say, 35 minutes at 375. Now, because they're two very different pans, different thicknesses, different treatments, different sizes of loaves, they're going to bake differently. So I think this one bakes a lot faster than this one. So you just got to keep an eye on it, make sure that you don't pull one out early and one out too late. Okay, so it's been 20 minutes and you can see how much the bread has risen already. This is going to turn out really well. One thing that I didn't do with this bread is I sometimes add chia seeds. So if you take this existing recipe and add half a cup of chia right at the beginning when you start mixing it, it comes out incredibly. The chia actually moistens up the bread and it's really good. Alright, so let's put this in now. 375, we've got 375 yet? Yep, 375. I'll set the alarm for 25 minutes just to check and turn the bread around. And then we're in business. 1 and 2. All right. Okay, so we're 25 minutes in, and I just realized that I forgot to top of the bread, see? So it's, I'll show you. So you see it's ripping along the side. If I'd have cut it right through the middle here, then it just would have opened up that cut. Anyway, it won't change the taste of it at all, but it will definitely change the presentation. See, look at this guy. See how it's kind of exploding all over the place instead of opening up nicely where I would have scored it. And see, it's kind of exploding all over the place. Anyway, they're almost a little more than halfway done. This one cooks a little faster. This one cooks a little faster than that one, so we'll give it another 10 minutes and get back. Okay, so we're at the 35-minute mark, and I think the one loaf is ready to go. Let's have a look. Yeah, this one is ready. So this one is ready. It's got a nice brown to it. Grab it and not drop it. Yeah, look at that.
Oh, it is a fair fight. You're just bad.
That is beautiful. So it's a little lopsided because I didn't score it down the top. What I should have done is sliced it down the top here before I put it in the oven, and then it would have opened nicely around that slice. Instead, it's a little bit lopsided, but I can handle that. Let's see how it comes out. Oh yeah. You see the folds that we left underneath? I'm sure a pro could do a better job of not having so many folds or such deep folds, but I'm okay with that being on the bottom, and it's crisped up nicely with that butter along the pan. This will be delicious. 5 minutes more and I'll pull the next one out too. Okay, so it's been a total of 40 minutes now. I'll pull the other loaf out, and this is the one that I'm worried about sticking. Oh, I don't think it's gonna stick at all. Look. Oh, that's a good thing. So you can see that the split happened right along here, whereas if I would have scored it on the top, that's where it would have happened. But it's nicely browned, it is nicely cooked, and it is going to fall out of the pan, no problem. Look at that. Beauty. So that's it. We got 2 loaves of bread. This will feed us for the next couple of days. So if you're finding yourself in a COVID crisis where you're heading to the grocery store and there's no bread left, which has happened a lot in Toronto and Ontario and across Canada, just a bit of flour and a few ingredients and you can make this bread, and it is delicious. You'll take my word for it. Thanks for joining me.